With that, I want to just jump into what we who do this work, who work with race relations, work on trauma, and deal with these issues, often get as our first argument or counter argument. What about that black on black crime, though? What about that black on black crime? Why when a police officer kills someone, y'all upset, y'all protesting, y'all mad about it, but y'all ain't doing nothing about this black on black crime? Who wants to be the first to address that? Because we've all heard it. That is the go-to staple counter argument. Jamal, I see you having that look on your face. I'm trying to get stuff. I can have you
Hey Joe, I see your bottom lip is bouncing too, Dr. Joe. I know you want to say so. Yeah, I could definitely take this one first, man. Listen,
go ahead. Hit it, Jamal. Hit it.
This black on black crime is nothing but a true diversion from the conversation around race relations when it comes to police community relations. And let me be clear, when we talk about black on black crime, it's crime, so there's no real elevation of white on white crime, Asian on Asian crime. We don't hear anything about anybody else's crime. It's always black on black crime because there's a diversion to really take away from the impact of racial oppression that is still happening within our communities. Here's 5 things I want people really to understand when it comes to black on black crime. One, you have to understand proximity, right? If we're definitely near each other, especially if we're in areas that are being deprived of the resources necessary for that place to thrive, and there's that proximity there. Because the second one of the 5 is segregation, right? When we look at Milwaukee being one of the most segregated cities in the country, the most segregated city in the country, right? So you have people who are factioned off in different areas across the city. When you think of the North Side, Central City, you think of Black folks. When you think of the South Side, you automatically go Latino. You think of further Northwest, you start to really see more of a Hmong population. And when you head towards the East Side, you start to see more of a white, more affluent, depending on what part of the East Side. But there's different factions that exist, and segregation is responsible for that. There is a reason why Milwaukee is recognized as the Selma of the North, right? Because of the impact of segregation and race relations that have happened here on a regular basis. People talk about the racism that has happened in the South, with Jim Crow and the Reconstruction and the Reformation period being the time in which the slave masters were giving reparations so they can be given their land back, which is a whole nother conversation in itself. But people don't really talk about the racism that happened in the North, which is why you saw such a large migration of people who went back down south, or they migrated west, because the racism was just as pertinent and powerful here as it was in the South. So the third part of that is spatial inequality, the third of the 5. So when you place a group of people in a certain area and you deny them the resources necessary for that area to thrive, that is spatial inequity. Milwaukee is also one of the leading cities in spatial inequity as well as many other Black cities, predominantly Black cities in this country. The fourth part of that, and Deshaun made mention to that, and I know Dr. Joe is going to get on that, is the impact of trauma, whether we're talking about generationally or within its current context. So when you think about the compounding of trauma, starting with generationally, how that passes, the concept of epigenetics, right? And how generational trauma passes through DNA. Your DNA strand doesn't change, but the gene activity can change through epigenetics and how that trauma impacts the DNA strand. But then you compound the trauma that people are experiencing now with that generational trauma, right? What does that do to people's mental psyche and how that impacts them within the communities that are marginalized and franchised? And the last part of that is poverty, right? How much people are impacted by not being able to thrive economically. Okay, so when we're talking about the ways in which people are really struggling, whether that's unemployment or underemployment, which people have this whole perception that Black people don't want to work. No, Black people are not being compensated for the work that they're doing, which is why they're working 2, 3, 4 jobs at a time, which is underemployment. So if people really want to discuss Black on Black crime, you have to discuss all 5 of those factors. And then stop saying Black on Black crime, just say it's crime, right? There's no crime that's relegated to just black folks. It's just crime happening, period. And
Absolutely.
we've got two brothers right here that's doing work to address that, as well as others across the country that's doing the work that's not being broadcast as much. But there's fighters against that are people who are fighting to end violence every day, and we have to dispel the notion that no one cares about the violence that happens in our communities.
I appreciate those words, brother, and there's no more truth than that. Dr. Johnson, go ahead and expound on it a little bit from your perspective of that whole argument of black on black crime.
Well, the great thing is Jamal broke it down. I mean, he broke it down, and I don't. For me, I hate that's almost when somebody says I don't see color. That's what it reminds me of, and I hate when people say that, right? And so the first thing that I think about when people bring that argument of black on black crime, that tells me they don't have a historical, holistic conceptualization of what's really going on in the world. Right. That tells me right there. And so that's the first thing that comes to mind. But the other thing is, when you talk about trauma, a lot of times we talk about PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. And when it comes to that, oftentimes something has happened in the past that's still impacting you today. Right. But I would argue that many of us, we don't have PTSD. We have CTSD, which is continuous traumatic stress syndrome. Right. And what that is very simple. Even if it didn't happen to me, but it happens and continues to happen to somebody that looks like me, it impacts me. Therefore, I have this experience of anxiety or this experience of fear or whatever emotion or whatever comes up from these actions and the things that's going on to people that look like me. And we have to understand that even if it did happen in the past, but it keeps happening over and over and over again like it is, we have a case of CTSD, continuous traumatic stress syndrome. And so those are the two things that come to mind to me when I think of black on black crime. And they have to understand, just like you said, Brother Jamal, proximity, right? If it's a bunch of us, if it's nothing but black folks that live in a 20-mile radius, of course stuff is going to happen within that 20-mile radius. The same way as in the suburbs, you get issues within the suburbs where if it's a 10-mile radius of only white folks. So we have to understand proximity. And, at the end of the day, when people don't have a fully holistic picture of how there's so many intersections of race and power and money and all of this is interconnected. And when you don't understand it fully and you're only looking at it from one area or one piece of your lens, you're not going to fully understand what's going on, and then they will throw arguments like black on black crime.
The other aspect of that, if I can just throw in, when we talk about gun violence is always elevated from an urban community standpoint. Most people don't know that the majority of gun-related deaths happen by way of suicide, and 70% of those happen in predominantly white communities. But we spend so much time talking about the homicides that happen within our communities as a way to justify the treatment of black folks, of saying, well, they're already criminals, they're already caged, they're already animals, they're already out of control anyway. So we need to make sure that we are controlling them in the manner that we need to control them. We also, we talk about mass incarceration, and somebody brought that point up. When you look at different laws, whether that's, the war on drugs, which turned out to be the war on black folk. We know that. When you look at the Omnibus Crime Bill of 1994, which was authored by the guy who's running against Donald Trump in the fall, we have to understand the impact of policies too, because there was narratives that was created in order to justify the actions. During the 2016 presidential election, they asked Trump, what did he think was necessary for the black community to truly thrive? And the first thing he said was law and order. We're not talking about more economic infrastructure being built. We're not talking about better education being built. We're not talking about home ownership. We're not talking about better opportunities for employment. We're not talking about better opportunities for entrepreneurship. We need more damn cops. That's exactly what he said on television. And then you turn around and you look earlier this year, and the Department of Justice is now going to implement in 7 cities, including Milwaukee, a militarization of police and putting funding behind it. So when we look at the whole concept of how people are being viewed, people that look like me, I don't have to be pulled over. I don't have to be treated like Brother George Floyd to understand the frustration, because I know that could be me any moment. right? Brother Joe knows that could be him any moment. Deshaun, you know that could be you any moment. Even if we didn't experience it directly, we know that could be us any moment because all they saw in that brother was a black face. So all they see in us, and all three of us, is black faces. And what do I have to do with black faces that I already feel that are animalistic, that are out of control, that need to be controlled? I got to put them down. I got to cage them, mass incarceration, or I got to put them down, murder.
Man, I think I told y'all, I warned y'all, this is not going to be a easily palatable conversation, and it's not meant to be. This is the truth, and the truth does not always feel good when it's applied. So we have